ANZAC Day this year marks the 100th anniversary since the first commemorations following the end of World War I. In Australia, the country was undertaking fundraising efforts. The first of 3 peace bonds was issued in August 1919, with the funds used to repatriate and support returning soldiers. At the end of the war, around 150,000 soldiers transferred to England from the Western Front, waiting to board their ship home. Many of the CBA men spent the remaining part of their military service working for the bank in London, or at many of its temporary branches set up where the Australian forces were billeted prior to returning home. Throughout the war, Australian cities hosted ANZAC Day commemorations, but in 1919 the parades were cancelled due to the outbreak of a global flu epidemic, commonly known as Spanish flu. ANZAC Day 1919 took on special significance for Australian servicemen and women in England. The most significant parades took place in London. 5,000 Australian troops marched from Hyde Park to Mansion House. Here, we recall the service of some of our staff members from across the country who survived the Great War, having dedicated themselves and put their own lives on the line for their nation and the bank. War was no stranger to Louis Morris. Morris had fought in the Boer War and signed up with the 13th Light Horse, with whom he had fought with previously in South Africa. Towards the end of the war, Morris transferred to CBA as manager of the Weymouth branch in England. He was decommissioned in 1920, and back home in Australia, Morris resumed his career with the bank, eventually being promoted to the position of acting inspector. Gunner, later Sergeant William Thumler, fought in the Battle of the Somme in 1918. He was so badly wounded he was unable to return to his artillery unit, working in the London branch for the duration of his military service. After the war, Sergeant Thumler returned to Hobart, where he later married his wife Alice. Fremantle-born Percy Bostock enlisted as an artillery gunner in June 1916, fighting on the Western Front right up to the armistice in November 1918. He left France at the end of 1918 and was assigned to the bank's London and Weymouth branches. He later returned to Perth branch after being discharged from the army in March 1920 and eventually transferred to Adelaide branch. For Major Leslie Fussell, ANZAC Day was of particular importance, having fought at the Battle of Hill 60, the last major assault of the Gallipoli campaign. He saw action in France and Belgium, where he was promoted to captain and then major, earning the Military Cross. He rejoined CBA as manager of the Canberra branch and made such an impression on his adopted city that they named Fussell Lane after him. Fellow CBA office clerk Lyndon Clinch was one of the eldest CBA men to enlist. He fought at Passchendaele. Private Clinch was wounded in a gas attack in April 1918 at the Battle of Villiers-Bretonneux. He spent the rest of the war at the Australian Corps School before being discharged in December 1919. He resumed working for the bank's Sydney office on his return home. Percy Stevenson was one of CBA's originals, having worked in the bank from when it opened its doors in 1912. He served at Gallipoli and in France and progressed through the ranks from driver to lieutenant by the war's end. In 1921 he was appointed manager of Charleville branch and went on to enjoy a successful career with the bank as manager of various branches across regional Queensland.